Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. On such a hot day, you came to sit here in the cool basement. It's kind of nice. So we're gonna talk a whole day on compassion for self and others. And normally when we talk about compassion, we get a good feeling, right? So I hope that this afternoon you all go home with a very good feeling in your heart and that you feel like, that was nice. We all have the seed for compassion in our heart, right? Sometimes the Dalai Lama says we as human beings, we are social animals. We like to be together. We like to be sweet with each other. And when we are born, the way we survive is through the compassion of our mother or other caretaker, right? When we are born, we cannot do anything, right? We plop out and we're just laying on our back and we're screaming for food and everything needs to be done to us, right? We cannot do anything ourselves. If we look into other animals, they are very different, right? If you have elephants or cows or dogs or the puppies, they immediately they get up and they can stand and they can walk and they find the milk of the mother themselves, and it's just not that the mother has to go with her breast to the baby, but the baby goes to the mother, right? So this is very different. So as human beings, we totally depend upon the care of others, right? If you can't follow me because I speak too fast, please let me know. Okay. We totally depend upon the care of our mother, and when the mother gives us food or comfort or drink or other types of care, she comes from a heart that wants to care. She comes from a heart that wants to free us from suffering, right? When we are in the bed and we are screaming, mom comes and she tries to find out what's going on for you. Why are you screaming, right? And then she tries this and she tries that, and slowly she starts to understand, oh, when my child cries like this, it's a sign that he or she needs milk. And when he or she cries like this, then I need to change the nappies. And if, right, mom learns to understand. But she wants to free the child from the suffering. So that's compassion. So from the beginning, compassion is there. Compassion with the first food that we get, compassion is there, right? So that makes that that seed of compassion is there from the beginning as our life. Our mom showed us how to do it. Our mom does it, and somehow that resonates with us. And from that place in ourselves, the compassion can start growing when we get older, right? So if you think, there are some people who cannot be compassionate, according to Buddhism, that is not true. It's like everyone has that seed of compassion inside them. So having said that, do we need to take some time to focus the mind to be here? Yes. You have been running around this morning. So maybe we take a few minutes to settle the mind, to bring the mind completely present, so that we can listen well, so that we can focus, so that we can think while we are listening, if it is true for us, how it is true for us, how we can apply it to our own daily life. And then it will have even more impact than without meditation. So we just close our eyes for a couple of minutes. You make sure that you sit comfortable. And you let your mind rest on your body. And when you notice that your mind is wandering off, either to what you have been doing this morning or to what you're going to do later today, then bring it gently back and refocus it on your body. And when the mind is still agitated from having been busy, you take your time. So you don't focus straight away on one particular object in terms of a very small object, but you take the big object, the body. And then wherever your mind is with the body, it can scan around the body. That is totally fine. But while you do that, you let your mind come to rest. And when you feel that the mind starts to come down, then you can focus your mind on your breath. For instance, by observing the rising and falling of your abdomen every time you breathe in and breathe out. And then we can think about setting a good motivation for being here today. And one kind of motivation that we can generate is, for instance, that we are here with a wish to develop our potential for wisdom and compassion. And not just for ourselves alone, but also so that we can be of greater benefit to all those around us. So whatever goodness you receive today, you give it freely to others. Whether that is by being a role model for others, whether that is by giving advice to others, but whatever knowledge you receive, you know it's not yours, it's universal. And therefore, wherever it is beneficial, you show that knowledge. Or you share it. start. Hi everyone online. I hope you're all fine. Just let me have a look. So sometimes when I teach, I would like to know what is going on in your mind, right? Because you come here with a wish to know something from me, right? But I believe that already a lot of that knowledge is inside you. You just somehow don't recognize it, or you lost connection with it, and so by giving questions back to you, often you connect with something inside you. Then when you connect there, you don't lose it anymore. You know, aha, this is it, right? So I'm not asking that to put you on a spot or to make you uncomfortable, or to, nor do you have to answer, right? If you don't feel comfortable, that's fine too. Nietzsche was sitting there actually. She might come back and maybe take a cushion and sit next there. But what I would like you to do when I ask questions, that you think, right? That you wonder, how is that for me? Then if you want to answer, great. If you don't want to answer, also great. Doesn't matter, right? That's totally up to you. But when we think actively and we look for the answers within ourselves, you know, something very different starts to happen internally. And then you can really walk away here and have brought something with you. You know, you can take something with you that is of value to you. All right? Can you, in the back, all hear me good? Yes? I don't need to shout? No? Okay, otherwise you come closer, right? Are you okay there in the back? I think he is. Okay. I said, can you hear me? You're all comfortable. Okay, you can hear me?
I can hear it perfect.
Oh, okay, wonderful, wonderful. So to talk about compassion. Do we like compassion? Huh? Yes. Why?
Who does not like compassion?
Who does not like compassion? What is compassion? How do we recognize compassion? How do we know, oh, there is compassion?
Kindness.
Kindness?
Maybe feeling love for someone else.
Feeling love for someone else. So that is compassion, feeling in yourself.
Love and care.
Huh?
Love and care.
Love and care. So when we feel love and care for others, or when others feel love and care for us?
If they feel for us, naturally they are having compassion. When we are feeling, they are having compassion.
Yes, it's true. Which one is better?
The one which we are giving.
The one that we are giving.
Yeah.
You feel it feels better?
Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. But we like the other one also, right? That other people give the care and the kindness to us.
If we will give, we will get.
If we give, we will get. Yes, yes. True. Is compassion something else? Something different from that? Kindness and care? That's it? If you have answers, you can also put them in the chat and I can read them. So if we look into what the definition is of compassion, then in Buddhism it is said that the wish to free others from suffering, that is compassion. So if I have to measure, do I have compassion in my mind, I have to look into, do I have the wish for others to be free of suffering? Right. And then when I think about, do I have the wish for others to be free of suffering, then I have to think about, what is suffering actually? What are we suffering from? Right? If we want to deepen our heart and we really want to get into the good qualities that we have all the potential for, we have to deepen our questions, I think. Right? So we say, oh yes, the wish for others to be free of suffering. Yes, that's great. Yes, we all want that. But then what is suffering? Right? So that's one question that we're going to want to answer today. And then we're going to see how do we feel compassion for that. And then another thing that we can wonder is, we say, I have compassion for others, but which others do we have compassion for? All others? Or others except? Right? And at our current state, most likely we say all others except those who have hurt us. We do not wish them to be free from suffering, right? We often wish them the opposite. We wish them the suffering. True? Right? We all do that, right? Don't think, oh, I'm so bad, I'm doing that. Yes, and I mean, we want to remove that from the mind, but it is something that we all do. Right? No one is free from that. Everyone who has an ordinary mind, that is the way the mind works. Right? We have big favoritism for those that we like and those that we love, and we wish them all the goodness that we can imagine, and we wish them to be free of suffering, so we have compassion for them. But for those that we don't like, we don't feel real compassion. Right? And when we see them suffer, then we think they deserve that. Right? You don't do that.
You would like to say that if they are like that, they should also include.
They also should be included, yes, and we will go there. But that's not the natural habit that we have. Right? Most people have the habit to wish for suffering when somebody has hurt them. It's just a state of mind, no? I cannot deny that. I cannot, not because if we're going to deny that, there's no reason why we are here. Right? And we all know it already. Feeling empathy for others, which is strong enough to take action to relieve them from their suffering. That's compassion. Yes. So to have compassion, we know to have a little bit of idea how it feels to suffer the way that other people suffer, right? Which means that we need to know what suffering is. And we need to know it not just from thinking about it, but from having experienced it. When we know what our suffering is, right, then we can also understand what the suffering for others is. We often see that people who have gone through a very difficult journey, they know the suffering of that journey, and then they become quite good helpers for others going through a similar journey. Right? Because they know what type of suffering is there. Even if they're not completely educated as a counselor or another therapist, but they are experiences. How you say that? They're experts. They're experts. Right? So when you suffer a lot in a particular field, you can become expert in that field, knowing what the suffering is, knowing how to be with the suffering, and from there, if you know that for yourself, then you can also teach that to others. Right? So the suffering that we are aware, so I'm going to talk a little bit about suffering. And I know suffering is not our favorite topic. But if we want to talk about compassion, which is wishing others to be free of suffering, we do need to know what suffering means. Right? Otherwise, what are we talking about? Just a good feeling that comes from compassion. It's not enough, right? You understand? So I will try not to go too long on the suffering, but I do go a little bit deep so that we see that there are many layers of suffering. Hi. We're talking about suffering. You just came on the right moment. So the suffering that we all know and recognize and wish the ones that we love to be free from is the suffering of pain, right? Somebody gets sick, somebody feels hurt, any hurt, pain, sickness, struggle, loss, right? That people feel like, then compassion comes, right? We know that suffering, and then compassion quite easily comes if we like these people, right? Then, if people are fine, where is the compassion?
I would say we will have compassion for others only if we've met our own suffering.
Only when we have met our own suffering can we have compassion for others. I think partly that is true. I think the better we understand our own suffering and we see the layers of the suffering, then we can also see, others, they're not just suffering from some pain, there are many layers behind that. Right? So the suffering of suffering is in general not too difficult to generate in the mind, right? But what about people suffering from dissatisfaction? How much compassion do we have for that? What do we say if somebody is not satisfied? You bring them to the best shop, you give them the nicest food, and the only thing they say, yes, but. Or what I actually would have liked to have, something like that you think, I cannot do any more effort. Why isn't this good enough? Right? So then what do we feel? We feel compassion with that person because they're never satisfied? Or we get agitated, like, get over yourself. It's difficult, right? To generate compassion with somebody who is not satisfied. What about if someone is harming others? Right? Who do we have compassion with? The one who's harmed or the harm giver? The one who's harmed. We can easily identify with that. But do we have compassion for the harm giver?
We can pray for him.
On some level,
Pray for on some level. What level?
for sure, the person must have been through something to do that.
You think the person must have been...
There's
He
some
must have gone
reason.
through something bad.
He has a reason to do
He's
that.
not, maybe he's a psychopath.
Maybe he's a psychopath.
Even for that, there could be a reason.
Knowing their perspective of why they were doing it.
Right.
So you feel on some level there's
Right.
compassion with that person also.
You really have that, or you have that when you think about it?
Sometimes I think
When you think about it, right? It's hard when when an incident is happening, right? Then we're not going to say, I have compassion for unless if you can do it, it's very good. But often we react emotionally, right? And when we react emotionally, then we choose for the victim.
I know that the whole thing, but I'm not sure if I feel that emotionally, the compassion.
You don't know if you feel that emotionally?
I mean, how do I explain? I know the thing that the person, there's something wrong, or the thing he's done is bad, but there's a reason. But I'm not sure if I'm compassionate, but I think I know that.
Right. You're not sure if you're compassionate for the perpetrator, but you have some knowledge that there must be a reason that he is like that. Yes.
But I think, I don't know.
But when the incident happens, what happens to that knowledge?
It goes for a walk.
The knowledge is not there, right? When we see an incident happening, we react emotionally. Then when we react emotionally, we immediately take side for the victim. right? Then it's very hard to think, oh, the perpetrator must also suffer from something.
And it depends also about our own experiences. Like if somebody has been bitter and later on he has realized that what harm it brings to own soul, then he feel compassion with the person who is committing the act, because he knows that at some point of his life, some point of time, he is going to realize that what he has done, and the suffering will start from there.
Right.
For that particular person.
Right. And so we are talking here about, I'm just going to help the people online to understand because they don't understand everything, that when somebody has engaged in a negative action, that they will start to suffer once they realize what they actually have done.
Yes.
And so then you said you can empathize with that because you have also engaged in these negative actions, and therefore you know that, oh, very good, very good, very good. So when we start to recognize that we also have a perpetrator inside, and that we also sometimes engage in negative actions, and that when we do that and we realize what we have done, we actually feel a lot of suffering about that, and right, that it is not coming from happiness, right? Having that experience with yourself actually helps to see you better and understand better the perspective of the perpetrator. Very good. Very good. So connecting with our own negative tendencies might help us to develop more compassion for people who engage in negativities. True? It's quite interesting, huh? So then instead of saying, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with them, we say, actually, they're reflecting something that I have inside. Right? So when I exclude them, I exclude that aspect of myself. And when I exclude that aspect of myself, I cannot do anything about it. But when I can acknowledge it, then I can say, oh, I'm doing the same. So what can I do to change this? Right? To not come from that place where I harm others. Very good. Thank you for that. Compassion is to have kindness to all other human beings. So in Buddhism, we talk a lot about compassion and we talk about loving kindness. And they are like the two flip sides, right? We need to practice them both. Compassion means I want you to be free of suffering. Loving kindness means I want you to be happy. Right? For you to be happy, you need to be free of suffering. When you become free of suffering, you become more happy. Right? But they're not the same thing. They're not exactly the same thing. Right? So try to see that. For loving kindness, you don't necessarily need to know the suffering. For loving kindness, we need to know, what do you need? What makes you happy? Oh, you want to have this and this and this, I'll give it you. Right? But with compassion, as you're suffering, what can I do? How can I take it? How can I take it away from you? Right? It's a slightly different mindset. Close capsulation, I don't really know what this means. Anyway. So when we look into suffering, we have the suffering of pain, then we have the suffering of dissatisfaction, or what we call in Buddhism the all-pervasive conditioned, the suffering of the all-pervasive suffering of conditioned existence. It's a long, which means it is, no matter what we get, there is immediately this mind of, it's not complete, it's not perfect, still something is missing, this feeling of dissatisfaction, very quickly it is there, no matter what we get. Right? So, and also when we really check, there is always some type of discomfort, right? Yeah, everything is good, but if I just had a better cushion to sit on, or everything is good, but, right? Always something not right. So that is called the all-pervasive suffering of conditioned existence. And when you look deeper into that, you can find how you react in certain patterns, you know. We all suffer from our own type of all-pervasive suffering. Some people, they suffer more from issues related to food. Other people suffer more from issues related to physical comfort or discomfort. Other people are more focused on sound, you know, like they have this hypersensitivity for certain sounds, and so they're always like, where is this sound? What is happening? I can't stand it. You know, they have a reactivity in relation to that. But that reactivity that we have, which moves into patterns, right? That is called the all-pervasive suffering of conditioned existence. We all have it, but it is slightly different in terms of color, you know, different types of colors. Then there is another type of suffering, which we actually do not recognize at all as suffering, which is the suffering of change. And the suffering of change refers to all our pleasant experiences, right? Which we think is our happiness. So the Buddha says, you experiencing that as happiness is that you cannot actually see the nature of your experience. Because whatever happiness we experience is in the nature of suffering. Right? One way of explaining that is with being in the heat and being in the cold. Right? When we are in a hot place and we are too long in the hot place, then we feel like, oh, I need to be in the cold, right? So when the suffering of the heat is at its highest, and then we go to the cold, right? Then the suffering of being in the cold is the lowest. That moment in time we call pleasure. We call happiness. Right? But when we are, for instance, in the heat, and then we come here to the basement, and it's nice and cool, and we sit down and we sit under the fan. Oh, so nice, so nice. So then we start then the moment that we sit down under the fan, the suffering of the coolness starts to happen. Right? But it is slow. And in the beginning, it's quite pleasant, and then we sit longer and longer, and at a certain point, we start to feel like, a little bit shitty, you know, not so pleasant anymore, right? Until we feel like, it's so annoying, I'm going to sit over there where I don't feel the fan, right? So then when the suffering of being under the fan is at the highest, and you go outside away from that, then the new suffering from not being under the fan starts. That moment you feel like, very nice. Right? But then when you stay too long away from the fan, the heat starts coming again. And you feel like, it's so annoying. I go back to the fan. Right? So every time that we move away from a certain suffering experience, the suffering of the next experience starts. And if we stay long enough with that experience, that will change into suffering as well. Right? So that suffering of not having ice cream, right? You postpone having ice cream, you suffer, and then you think, now I need to have an ice cream, right? And the moment you go into the shop to get an ice cream, the suffering of not having an ice cream is finished, and the suffering of having an ice cream starts. But because there is such a difference, this relief from that one suffering is finished. That's our happiness, right? That's what we call happiness. Oh, now I have my ice cream. So nice, so nice. I take another one. Then it changes into, my stomach, right? The suffering of having too much ice cream starts.
Stomach comes later on, a sensitive truth. It hurts as soon as he gets the first bite.
Yes. So this we have to we have to be aware that no matter what experience we're going to have, there is always a moment that it changes into suffering. So whatever we find is not by nature happiness. Right? If ice cream would be by nature happiness, then we could eat as many ice creams as we want and we only become more happy, more happy, more happy. That means the ice cream is in the nature of happiness. But it is not. The fact that the more we eat, the more we're going to suffer means that the eating of ice cream is in the nature of suffering. Can you see that? Right? So sometimes we put on a goal to achieve, oh, I really want to have this, right? One time in my life, I really wanted to have a new car. And I had the means to do it. Oh, I'm going to buy a new car, So, and I really want to have the car that I like, the color that I like, and the electric windows, and the roof, and all the details. I want to have it the way I like it. There was so much suffering even by coming up with that, For me, it's much easier, like, oh, there was the car, I'll take it, no matter what, It's much easier. Then you start looking for the details. Oh, this, because I feel like whatever color you choose, you cannot choose any of the other colors, right? So when I choose blue, then there is a suffering of not having the other colors. But anyway, I had this very nice car, and then I think I had it 6 weeks. And I don't know if somebody was jealous or just had an accident or whatever. But it looked like the key from someone had gone from the back of the car all the way to the front of the car. The hurt, So much attachment to my car. It's like, before I never could care what would happen with my car. But suddenly, oh, I want a new car. So much suffering, independence on that. Right? So you can think, wow, what do I want in life? I really want this. The moment you have it, it's going to deteriorate, right? And everything, whatever you have, it's going to deteriorate. So when there is a lot of attachment, a lot of wanting behind that, so much suffering is going to come from the moment you have it. Right? So the suffering of change is not even that we get something that we really like and we have happiness, and then after that the happiness changes. It's not like that. The happiness itself that we feel, oh, I have a new car, I have a new phone, that happiness, that is in the nature of suffering. Right? So sometimes we live our life and we just hunt these moments of happiness, right? I've heard some young people saying, at the moment, houses are so expensive. They were from London, I think. Houses are so expensive, we cannot afford that. So we can forget about that. We cannot even afford renting a house for, the couple. So we have to share a big house with other people. So this also, we cannot afford that. That we also cannot do. So we're gonna go for experiences. We're just gonna go for good experiences. Right? But if you go for good experiences, I mean, if you can really let them go after you have had them, fine, great, But it can also be that, oh, yeah, maybe. I don't know. Is that a solution? Does it make that life easier? Make it
a better attachment. I think.
a better attachment? Why is that?
So I don't know. It feels like a better attachment.
It sounds cool.
It sounds cooler.
Like investing into experience can be anything, like learning new things.
Learning new things, yes.
Depending on somebody else, like for happiness, that is not there because we are investing into an experience of learning something.
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
That is a better attachment because that also will fade away because you have learned that thing and then you have to start learning new thing to feel the pleasure again.
To feel the pleasure again. So you have to keep learning.
Yes, currently that's going on with me. So yeah, I can relate to that.
Huh.
I want to invest into experiences, but I also know that it is just a better attachment.
A better attachment means that you suffer less from
Yeah,
that attachment.
yes.
So when you have something, there is more suffering
Yeah.
from losing it.
Mm.
And when you go for the experience, there is just the experience, and after that it's finished, and
You
you're not
seek
holding
for
on
a-
to anything.
but then you seek for a new experience.
And then you seek for a new experience. That's very nice. That's very nice. So we have these 3 levels of suffering, right? The pain that we can see, what we call the suffering of suffering. Then there is the suffering of change, which are pleasant experiences, right? We can be happy when people have right? We don't have to think, they think they are happy, but they actually suffer, but they don't know that, you know? You don't really have to, you can still be happy for someone who has a good experience, because that experience is coming from the ripening of meritorious actions. So that is okay. But you can know, like, well, this is not going to bring you ultimate happiness. This is not going to bring you lasting happiness. This happiness is going to fade away very quickly, right? You need to have that knowledge in the back of your mind. And then we have the all-pervasive conditioned existence. And so when we talk about generating compassion for sentient beings, we all know the compassion that wishes sentient beings to be free of the suffering of pain. Right? When someone is really suffering, we wish them to be free of that. But it is very difficult to generate that compassion, the compassion related to the suffering of change, and the compassion related to the all-pervasive suffering. Right? So in order to relate more to to have more compassion for the suffering of change, is that you reflect on impermanence. Right? The more we understand impermanence, the more we can see that if somebody is really, really happy, we know this is only a peak experience. This is going to go down very soon, you know, because of the impermanence of the experience itself, because of the experience of whatever object is giving you that pleasant feeling. It's not going to last, right? So you reflect on impermanence. And so with that, you can also generate a kind of compassion for sentient beings who run after good things, right? You go to the shopping mall and you see people just walking around, right? Hunting, getting what they want. But whatever they buy is impermanent by nature. And whatever happiness they're going to receive from doing that is going to change very quickly. Right? So instead of thinking, oh, I need to do the same in order to be happy, you can generate compassion and say, you know, this is not really going to make you happy. This can give you some relief from suffering. This can be handy, what you're buying. This can be useful, what you're buying. But it is not bringing you the real happiness that you are looking for. Right? Not possible. And then in order to generate compassion for the all-pervasive conditioned suffering, we need to understand the nature of reality on the even more subtle level. We need to understand the empty nature of our existence, you know, of everything that exists. Everything is empty of inherent existence. If we then, with that knowledge, see human beings running around, running after good experiences, being free from unpleasant experiences, you know, then even more compassion comes. Because you know that sentient beings running after getting more good experiences, having less negative experiences, only creates the causes for more suffering, more suffering, more suffering. And so when we really can see that, the compassion becomes even more deep. Right? And so in Buddhism, we try to develop the compassion for all these layers of suffering. Not just, I want to be a good human being, you know, I want to take care of people because I have compassion, or we go much deeper than that. right? Any questions about that? I'm just going to look in the chat. What about attachment to being non-attached? Or less attached? Having attachment to being less attached. Interesting question, Minoti. Being as attached. I'm not sure. So if you have attachment to being non-attached, I would say, what is the reason that you want to become non-attached? Is that a reason that is connected to this life? Is it? Because everything that we are doing for this life, we do with attachment. So if there is somewhere a purpose in you becoming non-attached that has to do with this life or the happiness of this life, then the way that you want to achieve that, you can only do that coming from attachment. So then if you want to become non-attached, you have to set your purpose a little bit different, why you want to become non-attached. And it has to be beyond this life, right? For instance, I want to lessen my attachment because attachment makes me engage in non-virtuous actions in order to get what I want, or to be free from what I do not want. But the reason why I want to become free of attachment is because attachment is preventing me from liberation, for instance. Or attachment is continuously fueling the fire from samsara. And I want to get out of samsara. And so when your reason to become non-attached is I want to become free from samsara, then you cannot do that with attachment. All right? You think about it. Okay.
How do we deal with attachment towards new love and attention?
How do we deal with attachment to?
Towards more love and attention.
To what?
There are people who always crave
Towards more love and attention from others.
How do we get rid of attachment to more love from others?
How do we deal with attachment to receiving more love from others?
Our own attachment
Yeah.
to wanting more love from others. Our neediness.
Yes.
I'm here, you have to see me, you have to love me, this one. Okay, we go now to the suffering of ourselves, right? Because we want to talk about self-compassion, right? When we talk about self-compassion, how do we free ourselves from suffering? And one thing that we are suffering from is that we do not get what we want. Or maybe in the past, we did not get what we want or what we need, right? One thing that we want and that we need is love, right? Attention. We want it. And most people that I meet, they did not get the attention that they needed. They did not get the love that they needed.
They feel like that.
They feel like that. So there is a difference between feeling like that and having received it. Is it like that? I do believe that even if mom gives all the love that she has and she can give to you, it might not be what you feel that you need,
Yeah.
right? There might be that you and mom or you and dad are not connecting, not resonating on the same
You see, it's a practical thing.
Level.
Jealousy also comes in the house.
also. on the same level. So when I'm talking, you don't always interrupt me. So when I'm talking, it's very difficult when you interrupt me, right? When I'm talking to you, you can tell me whatever you want. But once I'm talking, because when you interrupt, then I'm listening, and then I lose my own line of... So no, that's okay, that's okay. So when we're now going to talk about that we have not received what we needed, it doesn't mean that we're saying that our mom should have given that to us, right? There are reasons why that didn't happen. And part of these reasons are laying in us, right? At least we had the karma not to receive that. We cannot deny that. Right? So mom and dad can do their very, very, very best, but despite that, most people feel that I did not receive the love that I needed. And that can come from little incidents that happen, you know, without anybody being at fault. Mom thinking that the child is with dad, dad thinking the child is with mom, but actually the child was left somewhere in a store. Something like this, you know. You can be traumatized for a long time by feeling so rejected and left alone in but it can also be that you just resonate on a different level. You're a different human being, right? You have a different frequency. I call it frequency. I'm not sure if that is the right word, but some people resonate with us and some people resonate with us not so much, right? Sometimes we have a click with people, and sometimes no matter what we talk, we feel like I'm talking to a wall, you know. No matter what I said, I have the feeling this person is not getting what I'm trying to say, right? So this, we can also have that relationship with mom and dad, like I'm reaching out and mom is trying to give, but somehow it doesn't match, right? So then we feel as a child, I'm not loved, right? It can also be that mom is occupied with her own traumas, right? Maybe she is going through something, losing someone from her family. Maybe she has a postnatal depression. Maybe she is mentally, you know, maybe she was abused when she was a child and she's mentally not so present when she's giving birth to her own children. Any of that, right? Mom not completely present. And the child is laying there, I need attention, and you don't receive it, right? Then we feel like, oh, I'm not worthy of the attention. I do not deserve to be loved. I'm trying so hard, but I'm not managing, so there must be something wrong in me. Right? Do we have these feelings? Right? There must be something wrong in me. I try my very, very best, and it's not working. I've done everything I can, and it is not working. There must be something wrong in me that I do not manage. Or I'm a failure because I do not know how to do this. And as a little child, we cannot see that the reason why that connection cannot be made is maybe not coming from our side, right? Maybe there is an incapacity from the other side. As a child, we cannot observe that. As a child, we think it's me, right? We are very self-centered. It's me. Something wrong with me. I'm not doing the right thing. I'm not worthy. Can you see that? But something might be wrong with mom, or wrong with dad, or wrong with the whole family. Not their fault. Something that happens because of life. We all come with a lot of suffering. Right? But when we make these conclusions, we carry that with us in life. And then whatever we experience, we see that through that color of our inner belief about ourselves. Right? So then when we say to a friend, do you want to play with me? And the friend says, no, I don't want to play with you. You know, we think, oh, what's wrong with me? Right? Did that happen to you? Yeah. It happens. And then we think, oh, they don't like me. right? Or something is wrong. We don't think, why can't you play with me? Are you busy with something else? Yeah, I have to go to the sport club, right? Oh, that's something very different. So it's not me. You already had something on your agenda, right? But if we don't check, then we think, oh, they don't like me, you know? Then maybe we have the courage to ask one more friend. But if he also has to go to the sport, but we don't ask, right? We feel like nobody wants to play with me, right? Then do we dare to come a third time and ask somebody to play with us, right? Then we withdraw. And then we walk around like nobody likes me, nobody wants, I better don't show that aspect of myself because people don't like it. So I don't ask anymore. And then we become more unhappy, more unhappy, more unhappy. And then we meet somebody that likes us, whether that is a partner or... And then somehow all these unmet needs, right? We reach out to that person. Please take care of this. I have all these unmet needs. You're going to fulfill that. But of course, that person doesn't see that little child that didn't receive what it needed, right? They see an adult woman or an adult man. And so they have no idea about these unmet needs. They have them themselves. But somehow it's not in the mind, you know, it's not consciously there. And so then our partner rejects us and we have more pain of rejection. And then we think even more, what's wrong with me? Why am I not able to manage this? What do I do with all this pain inside, right? We go around like this. So what can we do about that? We're going to try to answer that this morning, right? So I think this is our deepest pain, right? We have two types of pain. One is that we receive something that we didn't want. And then we have the pain of not receiving what we want. The pain of receiving something that we didn't want is quite obvious, right? Maybe you got too many beatings or other type of abuse. You know that that is not what I want. But if there is the absence of something that you need, it's much more difficult to grasp, right? Because you somehow have forgotten that need. You just have this feeling, this leftover inside, like something is wrong with me, people don't like me, your conclusions, you carry that with you. But you have forgotten that actually there was a moment in time that you needed to be held, or you needed to be loved, or you needed to hear something, and that didn't happen. And in dependence on that absence of something, you have made all kinds of conclusions about yourself, right? So then I can start saying, oh, you can just tell yourself that you do deserve it, right? Or that you are worthy of love, or that you are, but I'm not sure if that really shifts the mind. Right? Because deep inside you believe you're not worthy. And only one person has to hint in the direction of not giving you any attention, and you think, you see, I'm not worthy. Right? And everybody gives you attention, but that one person who doesn't give you, you use that one to say, you see, I'm still not worthy. So telling yourself, I'm worthy, I'm worthy, I'm worthy, and then waiting for that one experience where somebody proves the opposite, you know, my personal experience is like it doesn't work that great. I feel that you need to know what you actually need, what you want, what you want to hear from somebody, where you want to be touched inside. You need to know that, you know, because something is lacking. And in dependence on that lack, you have made certain conclusions about yourself. You think the lack is coming from you, right? Actually, the lack is coming from a need that was not fulfilled. It's different, right? It's not you who's wrong. It's not you who is, sometimes we can feel like we are broken, or we have a defect, or we have a No, there was something lacking in the fulfillment of your needs. It's very different, right? So with all of you, nothing is wrong, right? Fundamentally, nothing is wrong. We're all the same inside. We all have a mind, we all have a body. That mind is pure from the very beginning. That mind has all the characteristics in order to fulfill whatever, to develop whatever quality you want. We all have that mind. There is nothing in you that makes that. Everyone can do it except you because you have this, you know. That does not exist. That is a wrong conclusion. But to really start feeling that, you need to know then what was it that I needed. So you don't think what is wrong with me, but what is it that I need so that I feel good about myself. So you have to rephrase that question or that idea about yourself. Right? When we feel that we are not loved, then telling someone 100 times how much they are loved is not going to resolve that problem. Right? If you are feeling not loved and me telling you that you are loved is not going to undo the feeling of not being loved. True? Because we hear it many times and somehow it's not touching us there where it needs to be touched. Right? And only one person has to come saying the opposite and we say, you see, I knew it. I'm not worthy. He proved it again. So then how do we need to be touched? Right? So we need to know another person is not going to do this. Is not able to give you them. Because the one who needs to be loved is the one who is 2 months old, 3 months old, 2 years old, 4 years old. Not the adult woman. She is she knows, right? But the little one inside, that one doesn't know. So we cannot expect our partner to talk to the 2-year-old inside us or to see the 2-year-old inside us. But we can see that 2-year-old inside us. And we can talk to him or her. Right? We need to do it in our own way. Is that? So that is the main problem. Then I'll talk a little bit in general about self-compassion and how we can address, how we can develop that, right? It's like, at the moment, if we say, I have compassion for myself, what do we do? What does that mean? I'm at peace with myself. We defined compassion as, or Buddhism defined compassion as the wish to be free from suffering. So if I say, I wish myself to be free from suffering, how do we do that? What does it mean when we say that? To look at our own suffering. That's the good answer, but I'm not sure if we do it like that at the moment. How do we do it? How do we try to be free of suffering?
Stop running after things that you won't get.
Stop after running things that you don't get. You already quite need some wisdom to do that, but yes, that's true. How do we do that? How are you free of not having ice cream? From the suffering of not having ice cream. Huh? You have an ice cream, right? You buy an ice cream. So you give yourself what you want. That is one way of being free of suffering. I give myself what I want. And I prevent from things coming to me that I do not want. Right? So getting yourself what you want is following your attachment. Trying to avoid what we do not want is following our aversion. right? So we, at the moment, the way we practice the wish to be free of suffering is with our attachment and aversion, right? Which is focused upon the happiness and the freedom of suffering in this life, in this very moment, and we follow attachment and aversion. So what can you remember from the teachings on attachment and aversion? They are the causes for suffering, right? So the way we apply self-compassion at the moment is, if we look deeply into it, is actually creating causes for suffering. Right? So our method is not really a solid method based on reality. It is a method, it is an emotional method based on our ignorance and our deluded mind. True? We have to see that the way we do it now is not the way that is actually going to give us freedom from suffering. It looks like that in the short term. For instance, one way that we try to become free of suffering is if somebody has done great harm to us, right? We don't like it. Then in our mind, we start thinking what we could have done in order to prevent that from happening. True? So how does thinking about what we should have done in order to prevent that from happening, how does that help us to become free of suffering?
I think it gives you an explanation
Huh?
to the situation. It gives you an explanation to the situation.
It gives an explanation
It
of
may
the
not be
situation.
correct, but it still gives you something to hold on to.
It gives you something to hold on to. Right. So what are you holding on to? That,
I guess the reason which you made up for why it happened.
why it happened. So you blame yourself, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, probably.
Right? Oh, that's also not a nice thing to do. I have more the feeling that often when something really terrible happens to us, we cannot believe it. You know, it has happened to us, but somehow we can't get it. And so we try to undo it in the mind. How could I have made that not happen? You know, and then we go over the situation again and we think, if I had done that and that and that and that, it would not have happened. Right? That is one way of coping with something that is really horrible that has happened to us. In order to be able to be with the suffering. Actually, we are saying, I cannot be with the suffering, it's too much. So I try to undo it in my mind. Or when somebody really has hurt me, I start thinking about what an awful person that is. And I try to think that really loud, you know, because I have the feeling that if I think really angry about that person, somehow I think that person is going to stay away from me. Right? Or if I think really awful things about that person, as if I can harm that person with my thoughts. That's what we do, right? Nothing happens when we think like that. We just wind up our own mind. We create a lot of negative karma with our mind. And in reality, the only one who's suffering from that thinking is not the person who harmed us. Right? It's us. And no matter how much I try to undo what has happened, I cannot undo what has happened. Right? So that is our aversion. Our aversion does that. Hello. You're late. So we follow our aversion to become free of suffering. We follow our attachment to become free of suffering. Attachment and aversion themselves are causes for suffering in the long term. They give us, in the short term, some kind of relief, right? And we might have the feeling that that is the best option that we have, that there is no other way of being free from suffering. But Buddhism actually gives us a completely different way of looking at our own actions and what we can do in order to become free of suffering, which are very different from the way that we normally do that. Right? So we can go through the 3 levels of suffering and look at that. And then we look up at our specific sufferings that we have. Right? We sitting here, what kind of suffering we have, and then what we can do about that. How we can be with that suffering so that we become free of that suffering. Okay? Yeah? Yes.
Doesn't if you have aversion in your mind for something that harmed you in some way,
Yeah.
doesn't that keep you safe?
That is what we believe, huh? That if you have aversion for something that has harmed you, doesn't that keep you safe? That is what we strongly believe.
But it does, right?
Does it?
For future, maybe it does.
For the future, it does.
Maybe you need to stay away from particular.
Sometimes you need to stay away from particular things, but is that the aversion that makes you stay away, or could that be your wisdom mind that says I should stay away from that? Right? When we can do it with our wisdom mind, you can stay away from things, but you have no aversion in your mind. Right? So I'm not saying you should not give yourself what you need and become free of the harm that you receive. I'm not saying that at all. Right? But we use attachment and aversion to do that. That is a very short-term emotional reaction that can give you some kind of temporary relief, but on the long term gives you actually more suffering. So let's look into the 3 types of suffering and see what Buddhism says, how we can become free of that suffering. Right? First, there is the suffering of pain, which is all the negative experiences that we have, whether that is from contact with the 6 senses, the 6 sense objects, or whether that is in relation to other people, right? When we experience suffering, unpleasant feelings, right? Then in Buddhism we say, so normally then aversion comes in our mind, right? Oh, I don't want this, I want to move away from that. Buddhism says, where is that coming from? Where is that feeling coming from? Right? If somebody hits me, where is the feeling coming from? Is it coming from the hit? Is it coming from that person, or is it coming from my mind? My mind, right? So there is something in my mind that makes that I experience that particular suffering in that situation. For instance, if you don't get any ice cream, right, you might suffer a lot. If I don't get ice cream, no suffering, right? So where is the suffering? Is it coming from the ice cream or not having ice cream, or is it coming from your mind? It's coming from the mind, right? So the suffering that we experience, even if it is independent upon a situation which is harmful to us, right? The amount of suffering that we experience comes from our mind. The way we see what happens comes from our mind, right? So we can change that. So Buddhism says, what is the cause of unpleasant experiences? Do you remember? If we talk about, at the end of this life, there can be a happy life or there can be a suffering life. What do we need to do? So that depends upon karma. So what do we need to do in order to prevent the suffering from happening and making sure that we go to a happy life? What do we do? Virtuous actions. And before we engage in virtuous actions, what do we do? Wait. We Abandon the non-virtuous actions. That's correct. 1 minute. We abandon the non-virtuous actions. We stop harming ourselves. Right? So if you experience suffering, you start looking, where do I engage in harmful actions? Right? Because the suffering is coming from somewhere. And yes, they're coming from past lives, but I might still have some habits that make that suffering easily occurs in my mind. Where are my negative actions? And I'm gonna stop engaging in them. Right?
Is it not like the first step which we normally do, undoing it in our mind?
Can we undo it in our mind?
We try to, like, as normal.
But can we?
No.
No, we cannot, no.
But we think backtrack the whole situation.
We do backtrack the whole situation, but that is coming from aversion. And going back into what has happened and trying to backtrack it is not gonna change it, right? So you use your aversion to try to change it in your mind. Well, you cannot do it. And I explained that to show you that doesn't work. It doesn't work, right? So we need to look for another method to become free of the suffering of suffering. So we have to stop harming others. You had a comment? Yeah. Removing ourselves from? Removing our ignorance, yes. Eventually, that is the only thing that can really free us from suffering. So another way of preventing the suffering from suffering is that we already have done a lot of negative actions in the past, right? And all these seeds from these actions are in our mind, waiting for the right conditions to occur so that they ripen in a suffering experience. So what do we do with these seeds? If we want to free ourselves from suffering, what do we do with these seeds that are already in our mind? What do we have in Buddhism? What method? Come on.
Purification.
Yes, purification. We do purifying. We purify the seeds. Right? And we do that with practices. You know which one? Not so. Prostrations. Yeah, we can do all kinds of practices that help to purify the negative actions. In Buddhism, in particular, we do we practice the 4 opponent powers. It's called the 4 opponent powers, and we often practice them in connection with Vajrasattva practice. But we can also use them when we do other types of practices, like the prostrations, or like water balls, or like any virtuous action. So the 4 opponent powers are that we recall the negativities that we have done. And if you think, but I'm not sure what they are, but if someone is causing you hurt, somebody hits you, right? The fact that somebody hits you means that you must have hit before. Right? So when somebody hits you and you think, wow, the fact that that happens means I have some seeds in my mind of getting hit, right? That must mean I have hit. So therefore, when I start doing the purification practice, I recollect my negativities and I say, I did that. I hit. And I regret that. So regret is one of the 4 opponent powers. Why do we regret? We regret them because we can see how we have caused suffering for ourselves. And when we experience suffering, it's very difficult to practice loving kindness and compassion. Right? When we are experiencing a lot of suffering, we are easily agitated. The heart is not really open, the heart is... So when we have a lot of causes for suffering in the mind, and we just let that ripen, we experience suffering after suffering after suffering. Right? It's not good for us, not good for our practice. So we regret, strongly regret. Oh my gosh, I've created so many causes for my own suffering. right? I need to purify that. Then we visualize the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and all sentient beings around us, because any negativity that we have done in relation to sentient beings or to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, right? No other option. So we visualize them all. We take refuge in the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, and we generate bodhicitta towards all sentient beings. Bodhicitta means that we have the wish to attain enlightenment so that we can help them to become free of suffering. So when I generate that wish towards all sentient beings, then any sentient being that I have harmed, I have changed my attitude. Right? So you can see I purify very strongly when I have sincere bodhicitta in my heart. Then we practice, then we do some kind of purification practice, the remedy. So we can do the prostrations, or we can do the Vajrasattva mantra, or we can do other types of recitations, mantras, sutras, other practices, as a remedy. And then we make a very strong determination, which is called the resolve. And we say, I'm going to stop engaging in this action. Right? I might have a strong habit of doing something, right? I might have the habit of always taking somebody's pen away, right? I cannot stop doing that, for instance, right? So if you're looking for your pen, I might have taken that. I'm joking. Yeah. But I might have, people have sometimes a habit. They are somewhere and they just want to take something, right? I had a mom who loved geraniums, and we would go often to Germany, and they have the most beautiful geraniums, and she would always pick little pieces of the geraniums, and then she would plant them at home, right? So she could not stop that. It was like, she could see her whole garden becoming full of flowers, and she could not help herself. But if you have a habit like that, you could say, okay, so next time when I'm going to go to Germany, I'm not going to do that. Or instead of bringing 50 little plants, I'll bring maximum 5, right? To kick off a little bit. So you make a determination as far as you know that you can make that happen. Don't make a bigger promise than that. You want to succeed. You want to succeed, right? It's very important that we succeed in our practice. So sometimes you can say, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore today. I promise I won't take a pen today, right? Then tomorrow night, I make again a promise, how long I can do it, right? Or I say I can do it for 1 hour, however long you can do that. Yeah. And then at the end we dedicate the merit, and we dedicate the merit to our own enlightenment, but also to all sentient beings. And so we practice these 4 opponent powers in order to purify our negative karma. This also stops the suffering. Right? The suffering of suffering. Yeah.
You mentioned something about water bowls.
Forget about it. It's not important. Why do you want to ask that question? So we do a remedy in order to purify the seeds. You can do so. In Buddhism, we do the Vajrasattva practice. Vajrasattva is the Buddha of wisdom that purifies all our negative actions. But we can also do prostrations. We can also recite certain mantras. We can also do reading. We can also read sutras, right? So I said you can also do water bowls. For instance, if you have the tendency to steal, right? Like you are the one who's taking these pens away, right? It's not actually me. It's if you see that you have the tendency to do that, then doing the water bowls is a practice of giving, right? Might be a very good remedy for you, that you say, okay, I took all that away from sentient beings. I'm going to return it. I'm going to offer the water bowls to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and then all the merit that I generated, I'm going to give it to sentient beings. And you make your the practice of giving. Right? All right? Okay. Where are we? Time was 12 o'clock. That's very good. So that's what we do with the negative, to prevent negative feelings to arise. Right? What we feel as suffering is the arising of unpleasant feelings in our mind. Unpleasant feelings are a result of having engaged in negative actions. So as a remedy, we purify these negative actions, we stop engaging in negative actions, and we try to engage in the opposite, in the positive actions. Right? Then the suffering of suffering, you will see that in your life will become less and less and less. And people say, you're so lucky. You're so lucky. That doesn't happen to you. Right? But what is your luck? It is like you have purified the negative seeds and you have created a merit. That's what people call luck. Right? This is how you do it. You have a lot of luck. Oh, you're so lucky. It's hard practice, you know. So then, if we know how to, so then we think about the suffering of change, which was the pleasurable experiences that we have, right? So we don't really want to get rid of that, right? As long as we are in samsara, as long as we are not liberated from samsara, we are here, we have a body, and we like to feel happy, right? And in order to be able to continue our practice, we need to feel happy. Dharma practice is not easy. Dharma practice is abstaining from things, you know, letting go of your own craving for things. So that is difficult. So you have to make sure that you have enough causes for happiness in your mind so that you can manage following your path. Right? So we already spoke about that, how we do that, right? We create virtuous actions. We work for the benefit of others. Everything that we give, everything that we do for others, everywhere where we save lives, abstain from harming lives, you know, we create causes for happiness in our own mind. That happiness will help us to do the work of the Dharma practice. Right? Nothing wrong with happiness, right? We want to enjoy the happiness. We want to have the causes of happiness. Our problem is that we do not understand that happiness comes from virtue. We think happiness comes from the ice cream or from the coffee or from whatever. Right? But happiness comes from virtuous actions. Doing the virtuous actions itself already creates a feeling of happiness, right? You always bring that up. When we do something for others, we already feel happy. But then in the long term, there is also the effect that in future lifetimes, we will experience happiness independent upon other conditions. Right? So virtuous actions brings us twice happiness. The moment we do it, and then later experiencing the result. Then when we do virtuous actions with the bodhicitta motivation, then from the teaching last Thursday, we know that that will keep giving good experiences until we are enlightened. Good. So then we have the suffering of conditioned existence. What do we do with that? This reactivity that we have. Right? So then we start looking into where is that reactivity coming from. And if we dig deep, 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 and we go to the root cause of that, we end up at the me, I. I want to be happy, I do not want to suffer. So therefore, when I see something that I think is going to make me happy, I go for it. And when I see something that is going to make me suffer, I'm going to run away. Right? This me, this self, the way that we believe in that self, the self doesn't exist like that in actuality. So we have a certain appearance of that self. The self appears as, I don't want to go into that. I don't want to confuse you. Emptiness is a very big topic. So we have a self that we hold on to, that we cherish. This is why we always run after things that we like and try to move away from things that we don't like. We cherish the self. So the self that we believe is there, the self that believe is there appears as an objective entity, as something that is standing in and of itself. Sometimes it even appears as if it doesn't even depend upon the body and the mind, as if it is something separate from the body and the mind. Or sometimes it can appear as that which is in control of the body and the mind. Right? You have this feeling of self. That self appears as a one thing, right? A unitary thing. We have one self, right? Some people have more selves, but even if we really investigate that one self that we believe to have, it has many different aspects. But we somehow it appears to us as being the same thing. And that self appears to be quite permanent, not changing. Right? Has been with us from when we were little and has brought us here. Same self. And then that self is, it appears as that one thing. While in actuality, it appears as one thing, just one thing. So then when we investigate how does that self exist, can something as one thing exist? For instance, my computer appears as one thing. But is it one thing? Or are there many parts in it? Many parts, right? So every one thing has many parts. Any one thing that exists has many, many parts. But the way the self appears, it's like it is just one thing. We don't see the many parts. Right? We see only that one thing. The self appears to be permanent, more permanent definitely than it is. We might say, yeah, I changed a little bit. But when we really emotionally, we feel that it's the same self. Or when we feel hurt, we feel it's the same self. Oh, there is this hurt again. Right? The self that is saying, I'm not worthy, is still there. Appears as the same thing. Appears as the self that is, maybe it appears as the deepest layer of the self. Still there. Hasn't changed. Right? We have done a lot of work, but we feel it hasn't changed. So the self appears to be permanent, but in actuality it is impermanent. The self appears to be independent. It appears to function independent of the body and the mind. It appears to be an entity separate from the body and the mind, as if there is a body and a mind, and then there is the self. True. Sometimes it feels like the self feels like to sit in the body. Sometimes it feels like the self is in the mind. Sometimes it feels the self is different from body and mind. True. It appears like that, right? But the self does not exist independently. Everything that exists independence of other things. So for instance, the self that arises in the mind depends upon causes and conditions. right? If I'm in a very pleasant environment, the self that appears to me is very different than when I'm in a shitty environment, right? It appears like two different selves and it appears like the same self. So it appears that it depends upon causes and conditions. Then the self also depends upon the mind. Right? How I feel determines who I think I am. So the self that appears to us is the way it exists in actuality is totally opposite than the way it appears to us. And so then in dependence on that appearance of self that we have, we run after things that we think are going to make us happy, and we move away from things that are going to make us unhappy. Right? So that self is totally out of touch with reality. And then we somehow believe that if we follow that self, that is going to help us, right? This is what we do the whole day. I mean, it's a joke when I say it like that, but it's like we cannot even get away from it, right? It just functions like that. But we somehow believe that if I follow this I, it's going to make me happy. But this I is totally out of touch with reality. So in order to, if we want to, because that I is so out of touch with reality, because that I does not exist in the way it appears, right? We can realize that I doesn't exist in the way it appears. And when we realize that, the problems coming from that I are gone. True? So the moment we realize the nature of reality, the moment we realize that how things appear to us, they do not exist like that. And then from there we can realize how things exist. You know, when we can see that, we actually cut the root of all our suffering. So when you want to cut the root of all your suffering completely, you need to study emptiness. You need to reflect on emptiness. Right? It's a difficult study, but they say once you understand it, it's not too difficult to realize. So that gives great hope, right? Once we do that, there is real freedom from suffering. Real freedom from suffering. Because once there is self that we hold on to, that causes that attachment and aversion to arise, once that self is gone, right? Attachment and aversion cannot arise. And they were the cause of all our suffering. Right? So you can meditate straight on emptiness. You can also meditate on dependent arising, because everything that is empty of inherent existence is a dependent arising. The way things appear to us is as if they are unitary, permanent, you know. The self appears like that, but also everything else appears like that, as if they are unitary, permanent, and independent. And so you can meditate on everything, including the self, how it is existing out of parts, right? It is one thing, but it is also existing out of parts. We see both, right? It's not just one thing. There are also parts. So when I see the parts, I will break down that concept of it as one thing. Right? So in your mind, you can pull things constantly apart. Oh, there is my car. What is that, your car? You know? Pull it apart. Then you put it back together, then you put it again. And you keep doing that. You know, that breaks your concepts of one thing. Then things are impermanent. So you think about whatever you have. What was that before it became a computer? What was that? And you see the whole history of all the parts of the computer before it became part of your computer. Right? You travel around the world and see where they got all the resources, all the materials. And then you see what was needed in order to make the materials ready for your computer. Right? And then the people who put it together, and then the people who sell it, and then the truck drivers who have to drive the trucks, and then it's like there is so many people involved, so many things involved. That also breaks down the permanent nature of this, right? You can also visualize the computer in 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years, what is going to happen. In 10 years, what is going to happen. Where is it going to go? What is going to be left over from that? And you can do that with anything. Right? And then we have this idea about that things exist independent of the mind. So we think things are there out there, have nothing to do with me. It was there before I came, it will be there after I come, so therefore it has nothing to do with my mind. Right? But everything that exists depends on our mind. If I have a computer and it has many, many, many parts, and I look into all these parts, not one of these parts is a computer. They're all non-computer. All the parts of the computer are not computer. There is not one part that I can point to and say, oh, that is the computer. No, there are only parts which are not computer. Then they all put together. Then I say computer. Where is the computer? Where is it?
They come together. When the parts come together.
In the parts.
When the parts come together.
When the parts come together. But where is computer coming from? It's a label. Where's the label coming from? From your mind. Right? So we seeing the whole is coming from the mind. It's not coming from the computer. Not coming from the thing here. There is nothing here that is computer. Right? But there is many different parts, and then my mind calls it a computer. For this to exist, I need both. I need that thing in my mind, and I need this thing. They come together, and then in the computer we all agree this is a computer. Right? But the label computer comes from my mind. True? So this is what you can do. You use the dependent arising, that things depend. Everything depends on my mind. You use that to reflect, When emptiness is very difficult, you can reflect on the fact that everything is also a dependent arising. And then your very concrete concepts that we have in the mind starts to break down. That will give you already a much less suffering. Right? Because we experience a lot of suffering, independence on that solid feeling of I. And independence on that solid feeling of everything around us. So when we start breaking that down, a lot of suffering already is gone. All right? And so then what we also can do is we can think about the delusions. But I think that's a different different day if we're going to talk about that. So you can think about all the delusions that you have, your attachment, your aversion, your anger, your jealousy, your pride, and you can look at why that reaction, which appears as if it's going to bring you happiness, and it appears as if it is going to bring you freedom of suffering, why it doesn't have the capacity to do so. Right? So that is another thing that you can do. Then, what I want to do before we break is, there is one very long question on the chat. Can I just read that? And then we go to how to be with ourselves when we suffer, because that is really difficult for many people. So this afternoon we're going to talk about equanimity, Vinoti. And then Alexis asks, how likely is it that one will be born again and have to live life first, let everything be done to it, such as retained thoughts, recalling images, that always the evil of life presents itself first. Yet, with lifelong practice of my own falling asleep exercise or oration with meditation, I have no idea, as a little boy at the age of 8 or earlier. Oh, no, thank you. Not yet, not yet. We don't have lunch yet.
You can place it.
Okay, thank you. Oh, no, this is already blessed, I think.
Okay.
I always only have peace and love, and by love I don't mean sex, and no one has to go hungry, but that never has worked. Because in the message, in the TV, they always write the opposite. I quickly came to realize that I am personally happier with my life when I do this, despite negative world. Is that a right mean? Is that what you mean? I hope you understand. You know, from social media, we get often, and also from the TV, they tell us stories, oh, this is going to make you happy, this is going to give you freedom from suffering, which is, if we really look into it, it's not true. It's not true. Many of these promises are not true, just as that our attachment, what it promises us, is also not true, and what our aversion is promising is also not true. Right? So what they are doing is they try to hook you in your attachment. Right? So the more you believe in your attachment, the more you believe in the stories on the television. But if you don't believe in your attachment, and if you can see that attachment causes you a lot of suffering, you know, then when you see on television, just wonder, where do they want to hook you? What do they want me to do? Oh, they want me to buy something, right? They want my money, right? And so then they try to get you somehow, they subdue you, you know, oh, you want to be more beautiful, you want to be more attractive, you want to be more successful, you want to be more healthy, you want to be, oh, here, buy this, right? And then it looks really beautiful, and the images on it look really beautiful, and we think, maybe, you know, we are somehow aware of our suffering, right? We are suffering the dissatisfaction. And then all that happiness appears, and you think, yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's true. I'll try it. Right? Then there the money goes. And then it doesn't work. And then we think, it's maybe me, you know? Because all these people seem to be so happy, but I don't feel that. What's wrong with me? Right? Maybe I should try harder. I'll buy 2 of them, 3 of them. Right? Then still no happiness there. Right? So we are tricked, we get tricked. The reason why we came to this planet is due to our desire, due to our attachment. We want the pleasures of the 6 senses. We want the pleasures of the sense objects. Right? This is what drives us. This is what drives everybody. And so the people on the television, they know really well how the mind works. And they're not teaching you how to get rid of your attachment, right? But they try to make you believe that if you throw out religion and if you follow them, you're going to be perfectly happy. And if you know a little bit of the mind, then you know that is completely not true. It cannot work like that. It's impossible. It's like physically impossible. But they want you to believe, right? And as long as we believe in attachment, they have us, they hook us, no problem. Right? So you need to know about your delusions. Maybe next time when I come, we talk about the delusions, attachment, anger, right? And why what they're telling us is not true, cannot be true. And then how we can counteract that. But for today, I just want to, you know, we talk about compassion. And so compassion had a lot to do with suffering, right? We want to be free of suffering. And now you know how to create the causes to be free of the suffering of suffering. You know how to create pleasant experiences for yourself. You know how to counteract that underlying pervasive suffering, so that working becomes less strong, right? So when you engage in these practices, that is compassion for yourself, right? You are trying to lessen the suffering for yourself. That's a way of self-compassion. And then another thing that we need to do for self-compassion is that when unpleasantness comes, right? I think that is, for many people, the hardest thing to be with. When unpleasant feelings come, unpleasant experiences come, what we do is we run away. We don't want to have it. We try to suppress it. We try to deny it. We try to, right? Many things, as long as I don't feel it. Right? That's what we all do. This is what aversion does. Right? That's the job of aversion. Aversion cannot do anything else than that. So when feelings arise in the mind, anything that arises in the mind dissolves back into the mind naturally, like waves. Sometimes we have strong concentration and then it dissolves again. Sometimes mindfulness is there and then it dissolves again. Sometimes, depending on our practice, it can stay a little bit longer, or it stays, it is not completely gone. But things arise and they come and they go, depending on causes and conditions, right? And in every moment of mind, feelings arise. Feelings arise and then they go again. They dissolve again, right? So what we do is, when pleasant feelings come and they reach their peak and then they go down, we say, no, don't go. We hold on to it, right? And we somehow try to prolong the feeling of happiness, or the pleasant feeling. It's not happiness, pleasant feeling. We try to hold on to that. When unpleasant feelings come, the feeling comes, and then before it can reach its height, we say, no, I don't want to feel this, right? We push it away. And we have many techniques how to push it away, but we push it away. We do not allow the feeling to come to its height, which means that the feeling cannot dissolve back into the mind. We actually hold on to suffering, right? By suppressing it, we hold on to it. If we would be able to allow that feeling to arise, it would just naturally disappear. But we think it's too painful. I don't want it. Right? And so then it stays in the mind. And then when it is there and we suppress it, then what do? We distract ourselves with more attachment. Right? And then something unpleasant happens, we suppress that again. And we collect all these suppressed negative feelings. Right? And we become better and better in distracting ourselves with pleasant feelings. Especially if you have a good worldly life. So many options to distract yourself in pleasantness. And not dealing with the unpleasantness. So that is sitting there. Right? Until you get a breakdown, or a crisis, or something, right? Or a panic attack. And then suddenly your therapist says, yeah, well, there are all these undigested emotions that you need to deal with before you can move on with your life, And then you sit with a big pile of, my gosh, how do I going to do that, right? True? So we have, I don't know, have you learned how to be with unpleasant feelings? No? No? You? No. Somehow we don't put it in our education, and it is such a useful skill to have if you know how to be with unpleasant feelings. So in the universities, there are people who work with self-compassion, right? And they investigate self-compassion, and they investigate the components that you need to have in order to develop self-compassion. And they say that when you practice this for 2 weeks, you will see great improvement, right? So I'm going to tell you what they say to practice so that you can be with unpleasant feelings, so that you know how to be with them, so that they can arise in your mind and then dissolve, so that you have like a clean slate, you know? You make yourself clean inside. Then there is space for new things. But when this unpleasantness is sitting there and all the time you're running away from it, you can't deal with it, you don't know about it, you don't, even if you try to look at it, you're not really looking at it. It's like it keeps you running. It keeps you doing. Right? You're never going to be really at peace. It's impossible. But when you have no fear for unpleasant feelings, and when you know how to be with them, then when they come, you can say, okay, you know, I'll take a day off and I'll sit with it, or 5 minutes, or however long they're going to be in the mind until I'm able to let them go. Right? Then it's gone. Then you're clean. Then you also do not have to run away from something. Right? So at the moment, we use our attachment to run away from these unpleasant feelings. We go shopping. Right? And we buy all these things. And so those who are selling things, they are very, it's very good for them if you do not know what to do with unpleasant feelings. Right? Because you keep running. But the moment you find peace, you have no need to go shopping like you did before. That will change. Right? You become much less vulnerable for all kinds of techniques that want to draw you in, or that want to hook you in, or that want to get your money somehow. Right? You're much less vulnerable for that. Can you see that? Good. So there are 3 components that are important when unpleasant feelings arise. The first one is being mindful of the feeling. Being aware of the feeling. You know, often we are immediately gone. Unpleasant feeling, we're gone. We're not even aware that we are gone. Right? So becoming aware. Oh, sometimes you find yourself 2 days later and you think, oh, for 2 days I've been running away. And now today I feel so sick, you know. Maybe that was already there 2 days ago, but you did not notice it, and so you used an old reaction to get away from it. And then it took 2 days to catch up with you, right? So you have to be mindful of it. Stay with it, right? Sometimes unpleasant feelings come, you bring your mind to that feeling and you stay with it. Right? Then you can see the mind wants to go, and you say, no, I'm going to stay with it. How does it feel? How does it feel when the unpleasant feeling is arising? What do I feel? Right? Sometimes we feel feelings everywhere, right? So just be with that. Just feel it. What is that? What is that? Right? When fear is in the mind, wow, we can feel that here in the stomach. Right? And we just want to get away. But you say, no, what? You're going to be curious about the feeling. Right? You're going to be curious. Then the second one is, and I think that is a very big one for many of us, is that when you are suffering, when an unpleasant feeling is in the mind, you talk very kind to yourself. Do we do that? How do we talk to ourselves when there is unpleasant feeling in the mind? Huh? We blame ourselves. We feel guilty. Do we beat ourselves up? Yes. How stupid are you? Stupid. So stupid that you let that happen. Right? So you're suffering and then you get scolded. That's what we do. So if it would happen to your friend, what would you say to your friend? It's okay. And to yourself you say, you're so stupid. Would you say to anyone else in the world, you're so stupid when that happens? No. To no one. No one. Except to yourself. So why do we do that? I haven't found the answer, but I'm so curious. Why do we do that? Sometimes I think that is our attempt to separate from the unpleasant feelings, you know? Just as when somebody attacks us, we want to attack them back to separate from the unpleasantness that that person is giving us. So then sometimes I think when unpleasantness comes, we want to separate from that. So we beat ourselves up. We blame ourselves for that. I don't know.
Maybe giving a reason to us.
A reason to ourselves.
Yeah, I'm stupid, that's why it happened.
But why do we do that only with ourselves and not with others?
Sometimes we expect more of ourselves.
We expect more from
We
ourselves.
think that's really dumb that I did that.
We think that we should be free of suffering. Everybody else in the world is suffering, but we should be free of suffering, right? Huh?
We feel entitled.
We feel even entitled.
Sometimes we feel that only we can change our behavior or something that can.
Only we can change our behavior, which is true, right? Only we can change our behavior. But do we need to beat ourselves up? I have two fans before your voice is reaching me. It's like I can't hear you. Right. We try to correct ourselves and the feeling of guilt that we have about that we were wrong, and so we beat ourselves up in order to correct that, to cope with the feeling of guilt.
I feel that's also what we've learned to do, what we've learned from the way our parents or our carers have dealt with us when we have made mistakes, right?
Oh, so it is similar than the way our parents deal with us when we make mistakes. They beat us up like that?
Well, it's common in many cultures and countries to actually scold and frighten the child into correct behavior rather than, now we know about, a different kind of parenting and more, being more attentive and mindful to the child and, open and loving, all of that. But I feel have dealt with us.
We deal with ourselves in the way us.
Yeah, maybe that's the reason we tend to be
Hard on ourselves and have high expectations of ourselves. Yes. So is it that the voice of mom and dad or whoever parented us becomes our own internal voice?
What will mom say?
What will mom say?
Yeah.
That's just a behavioral thing.
And then we say what mom might say, and we say it already to ourselves, so that even before mom can say it, right? We do it to ourselves.
Or even before anybody else can.
Or before anybody else can
put
say it.
Us into the guilt.
Yes.
Put ourselves into that box. of
That's
guilt.
true. That's true. So how does it make us feel when we do that? Does it help to relieve the suffering?
It adds to it.
It adds to it, right? We're adding the suffering, right? There, we add so much suffering. So there is an unpleasant experience, and then the beating up that we do adds so much unpleasantness. And we would never beat up any suffering sentient beings the way we beat up ourselves. We don't do that with anybody else. Right? So the second aspect of practicing after being mindful of the feeling is kind self-talk. You talk to yourself as if you talk to your best friend who's going through a similar type of suffering. Right? So when you suffer, you visualize your best friend. And you talk to that person. And then you hear that yourself. Makes a huge difference. Huge difference. This takes away 90% of the suffering. And then the third aspect that we practice is that we think, when we suffer, we feel very isolated and separated. There is an aloneness there, like nobody really understands what we go through. I'm the only one who is suffering. You know, we feel our friends are all partying over there, but we are separate, suffering, right? There is a separation. So remembering that whatever suffering we go through is, we need to somehow reconnect, right? We need to reconnect ourselves with human existence, not stay in that separation, because separation is we don't like it. It's painful. So one way of helping us to reconnect is thinking that whatever we experience is just a human experience. I'm not the only human being who is experiencing this. There are many human beings who experience this, right? So you connect in that way to humanity. You can also connect, now I have to. Sometimes we are advised to think, my suffering is nothing compared to the suffering of so many others, you know, to help us not to beat ourselves up for that little bit of suffering that we have, but to help us reconnect with others. I'm not the only one who's suffering, and there are so many out there who suffer even more, right? We are in this together. Do you understand what I mean? That you try to reconnect? That when you are suffering, that you feel isolated, you feel separated. Do you know? Do you? So how can we help ourselves to reconnect?
So I tell myself the same things, that there are people suffering even more.
There's people even suffering more.
You don't feel entitled to not suffer.
You feel entitled to not suffer. But we are suffering, right? And when we suffer, it's okay, right? We want that experience to surface and then dissolve back into the mind. So we don't want to beat it back. We also don't want to nourish it so much that we somehow have a benefit of that suffering, but we want to reconnect, right? How can we reconnect? I'm just looking for ideas. Talking to a friend.
And they tell us some of their sufferings as well.
Right. Yes. So when we are in the suffering experience, sometimes we feel so isolated that it's very difficult to reach out to others. Right?
I think
Gratitude, practicing gratitude, you feel helps to reconnect after a suffering experience. Yeah, cool.
And it's really important to reconnect with the people who understand, because we cannot reconnect with everyone. And
You want to connect with people who understand what you're going through.
yeah, like they understand you and you know them very well, because somebody cannot go out and they can start reconnecting with everyone who is just passing through.
Yes.
So they start reconnecting with the people like our parents or our brother or our sister.
Yes, someone who we are close
So
to.
the inner circle, we start, and then start expanding the inner circle.
Yes.
So the more the circle.
So you share your experience,
Share your experiences.
sharing your suffering experience. Do we like that, sharing suffering experiences? Do we like it when our friends are suffering, sharing experiences? Not really. Yes, you like it.
To some extent.
To some extent, not too much.
If they keep going on and on.
When they keep going on and on and on and on.
It's like the third suffering. It's not happy with anything at all.
Right,
That
right.
really irritates.
Right, that really irritates, yeah. Yeah. Right, yes. Yes. I mean, that is our compassion, right? Listening to others when they are suffering. But we can already see, right? So maybe after the break, then I want to give you enough time to have lunch. We can talk about that, right? How we can listen to others with compassion, but also how we can listen to ourselves and how we can share our suffering with others, and how it is helpful in being with the suffering, and what it does to us, you know. The aversion is just coming from not knowing, you know. If you know how to be with someone who's suffering, it's not a problem. But there is a lot of other stuff happening that you feel like, oh, not really waiting for it. Right? All right, good. So we come back at 2 o'clock?
Yeah, 2 p.m. Firstly, thank you, Venerable, for a wonderful first session.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we'll come back at 2 p.m. And for those who have their lunch, please feel free to make yourself comfortable in the gompa. We have water and hot and cool drinks at the back to accompany the lunch if you like. For those who don't have lunch, Hoskas Market is just down the road, and there are many little restaurants and eateries there, so it's just a 5-minute walk away. And also, just to make a announcement for Tushita, we are an entirely donation-run center, so we can, we're able to have such special teachers like Venerable Jamyang and others solely by the generosity of our patrons. So please find donation boxes at the back as well as on the landing, and we would very much appreciate your support.
Okay. So we go for lunch till 2 o'clock, and then we're going to be back and continue the session. Okay?
Medita would like us to end the session.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we end the session and then we log in when you come back, huh?